was a lot of information about the whole, let's just call it contact, as opposed to disclosure. Disclosure is a word that for us really means, some official somewhere saying, yes, it's true.
Yes.
And our data seems to suggest that that's kind of irrelevant to the whole situation, and that in fact contact will come about and sort of bubble up through the media kind of thing. And we still have that data set building and unfulfilled insofar as this whistleblower episode is continuing. And yet, here we have all of these links to this specific time, this specific whistleblower set, and so on and so on. And so I find it, again, curious and surprising. It was very interesting. The universe provided us with the giant swirly thing in Norway, just as Obama's getting up there and taking the Peace Prize for killing all those people.
Yes.
And then at the same time, we have the pyramids spinning over Russia, over Moscow. Now, whether that's legit or not is immaterial. So far, the language is out there suggesting and tying these two woo-woo events back into the whistleblower thing at the same time. So I'm looking for more developments. I suspect we haven't seen any of it yet really to mature, and that my time frame would carry on until like January 2nd or 3rd before the thing starts to wind down a bit.
Yes. Hey, let me ask you a question. Whenever you first saw the video and the photographs of that the spiral out there in Norway, what did you think?
Oh, that it was a hyperdimensional manifestation, probably a weapon of some form, although it could have been maybe transportation or communication. But it was clearly an energy beam. It had nothing to do with a rocket.
Yes, that's what everyone keeps saying. And I tell you, boy, whenever I saw that, I thought, holy hell, the mist has begun.
Well, let me tell you, the very first thing I thought was related to a weird British television show called Red Dwarf. And they had this character in there that was a descendant from a cat who used to be able to smell danger in space, and he used to run around saying, "Swirly thing alert." That's what I thought, swirly thing alert.
Well then. Well, the second bit of data that we have here is terra crust filling, baking, freezing, thawing, drying, changing, and gnawing.
Yeah, that's the really nasty bit. That's why we put it up at the top so everybody get through it and so on. There's this unschooled, highly educated person out there by the name of Patrick Garrell, who's I believe he's Dutch. He may be Belgian.
Yes.
And either way, I if I've offended him for mislabeling his nationality, I apologize. But anyway, he's really smart, and he corrected some errors in Maurice Cottrell's work relative to the sunspot cycle that's been encoded in the Mayan stuff. And he really does think, and he's found the math to prove that we're in the end of a very major sunspot cycle. And I agree with him. I've gone through all of his math and I found a couple of arithmetic errors, but they don't invalidate the perception at all. It was simply a matter of these two numbers not quite adding up, and they just needed to be corrected. And the end result still was within the range. So, in any event, the crust of the planet is not as stable as most people would like to believe, and we're going to go through the baking process. That's why I put in all the pi words, because we're going to get weird, nasty weather, and we're getting it now where, for instance, our glorious leaders, let's just call it that, over in Copenhagen and shouting to the rooftops about global warming are in the midst of a blizzard. That blizzard could descend further and hit the UK, and it may be actually record-breaking weather, and anybody in the UK should really take notice. And even all the way up into Greenland, the Faroe Islands, I'd be very concerned about having enough supplies for at least 7 to 10 days of fairly intense sub-zero cold. And I don't think it'll get all the way over to the far Atlantic states in Canada, but it just might. So we may see some of it on the East Coast, and it's going to be a really hard freeze. The problem is, right up north of us, I've got friends of mine north of the Arctic Circle in the First Nations area. They're telling me it's raining up there.
Really?
Yeah, not a good sign. Once we get lateral banding like this, then that makes us more or less like the gas giants, where their storms just truck around in the same latitude. This has to do with magnetics, and it indicates that our magnetic situation is becoming more rigid.
Yes.
And in nature, rigidity always ends with some kind of a fracture.
Right. Now, I had the opportunity to interview Patrick Garrell, and he, from what I understand, if I remember correctly, because this was about a couple of years ago, his calculations show that the Earth is actually expanding. Is that right?
That's correct. And it occurs each and every time that there's one of these cataclysmic crustal shifts.
Yes.
You can explain it a couple of different ways. What I have, my explanation is that if you look at the EM equals MC squared equation from Einstein, which is valid to a certain extent, you notice that there's matter and energy are essentially cannot be destroyed. They are crossed back and forth to each other.
Right.
And you have to have a place somewhere for that energy to be created into matter, and it's in the middle of all the planets and in the middle of all of the suns. And in our case, what happens when we get the giant pulse of energy from the sun is that energy causes actual matter creation in our plasma core in the middle of our planet, which heats up everything and expands more magma and so on, and so the Earth gets a little bit bigger. Thus, if you were to go around and take a map of the Earth and cut out around all of the continents and fold them appropriately, they would all fit together. So if you just reduced the area of the Earth 40% and got rid of all the oceans, we'd snug right up together, and it'd be a perfect, nice little sphere.
Yes.
And so he's quite correct. I believe that we will have another expansion event. And to be honest, I've never been able to find proof of subduction. There's a lot of claims, and they offer some evidence subduction zones exist, and I theoretically live near one of them over here on the San Juan Plate, and it sort of behaves that way, but they only have 2/3 of the actual evidence that, in my mind, it would take to satisfy it as a subduction zone. And the plasma expansion model actually explains it a lot better and fills out all of the gaps.
Did you see the video, or the video and the pictures that were taken of the underground volcano, or the underwater volcano? They finally got a great picture of this, and they were all excited about it. And did you see this recently?
Which one was this? The one off of Tonga or the one further out in the Pacific?
Further out in the Pacific.
Okay, yes, I did see that. Yeah.
You see that. Now, I thought this is, we have the Ring of Fire up there. We've got an enormous amount of activity going on there. Lots of, again, watching some of the earthquake patterns and some of the things going on with that. The Earth is a rumbling. It
sure is, yeah.
So there's something going on there, and while everyone's focused on the global warming, the global cooling of it, from what you said, is very possible going to hit, and it's going to catch a lot of people off guard then.
And also, if you go and read Robert Felix's works on Not by Fire but by Ice, and his latest one on magnetic reversals, you find that there is some support in there in terms of historical evidence for a period of abrupt climatic reversals just prior to the magnetic reversal. So the magnetic reversal is on, say, 11,500 years, just to pick a number, cycle. Well, within the last 2 or 3 or 4 years before the reversal actually occurs, there's a whole lot of evidence of climatic instability just as we're in now. So yeah, I think paying attention to anything that our glorious leaders are spewing out is just a distraction, and we really ought to just open our eyes and see what's going on. I, for instance, in the even as early as 1998, I believe, started doing what were known as Secchi disk. That's a thing you use in oceanography to determine the clarity of water, but you can also use it. It's a known white disk. It has a known color parameter and reflective parameter, and you can mathematically use it for calculations with various different kinds of light-sensing things, including your eye. And I started checking out the sun because I knew that there was something odd with it. For A, it wasn't yellow anymore.
Yes.
The reflectivity off the Secchi disk proved that instantly.
Yes.
But also that it appeared to be increasing in intensity. And so from 1999 until about 2002, when I really annoyed my wife with all this crud over the back deck, and finally took it all down, I convinced myself that we'd seen about an 8% at a minimum level of increase in visible and actinic ray light from the sun.
Yes.
And this is supportive of the idea that the sun is getting magnetically squeezed, because if you take a magnetic containment vessel and you're working in the plasma field and you shove all this plasma in it, and then you start ratcheting down on the plasma with the magnetic containment vessel itself, the plasma colors change. So you might be initially dealing with something that was, say, bluish and tinged slightly green, and the more you push down on it, the whiter it gets.
Right.
So we're sort of seeing in our sun the same kind of things that the Russians are doing in experiments in their labs.
Well,
and the more you get squeezed, the more we'll actually end up feeling it. I think humans are actually feeling it as well now.
Right. Well, there hasn't been a whole lot of sunspot activity on that thing either. I've referenced this many times because this is it was an incredibly strange sequence of events whenever suddenly the solar flares were starting to kick up, and scientists were going, oh, here we go, we're getting the start of solar cycle number 24. And then it just like someone pulled the plug. It just went silent, and everyone's going, that was anticlimactic, you know. But that is then, which also goes back to the temperatures of the planets, because when you get less sunspot activity, you've got cooler temperatures, right?
Well, that's normally true, but we actually, to a certain extent, we have to acknowledge that climate change is going on.
Yes.
And while it is true that we have many areas of the planet, especially in the temperate zones, that are getting extremely cold, we're now into banding. So the planet as a whole is actually heating up. This may include extremely cold areas, for instance, all across North America and into Europe and Siberia and so on, at the same time that the North Pole melts. And the incongruity of that is going to cause a lot of people to twitch about and wonder what's going on. The issue of the sun and the sunspots is interesting, too, because it is now officially the longest period of observable time that we've seen no sunspot activity. And this is a predictable sort of a thing within the idea of the big squeeze and the magnetic, the giant sunspot cycle, as described by Garrow and extrapolated from Maurice Cottrell's work. It's predictable that certain things will occur. But as the magnetic windings go around the sun, first off, we have to stop and say that the sun's pole spins at the rate of 37 and some fractional part of a day it takes to do a revolution.
Yes.
But the equator of the sun, because of the tug of all the planets in centrifugal force, is spinning faster. So it only takes 25 days to go around, where the poles take 37 days to go around. And thus, every 87 days or something, we have an extra loop that's created by the equator actually outpacing the sun's poles.
Yes.
This causes a torsioning or tensioning on the magnetic forces and starts to pull them around towards the poles. And it's actually what causes sunspots to begin with to occur at a specific spot. We almost always see the sunspots occur at 19.47 degrees up to 33 degrees of latitude.
Right.
And this is why this is why we have 33rd degree Masons. This is why Washington D.C. is on a particular parallel. This is why they encoded all this information, and the secret societies have carried it forward, and they're worshiping these numbers without understanding exactly what the numbers mean. They think of them as their power base, but really they're a big warning.
Yes.
And the warning is that when this occurs, certain things will happen, and eventually the sunspots would